And the next topic is about friendship and enmity. The next topic the name of the next topic is Frenemies. How political can literature truly be? So, very interesting topic. Politics. Everyone loves politics. Everyone loves friends. Everyone hates enemies. But let's see what our esteemed guests have to say about this. So, we have here with us Paul Zacharia. Please clap for the guests as they come up on the stage. Paul Zacharia is one of Kerala's most beloved writers, a distinguished fellow of Kerala Sahitya Academy. He has received the Kendra Sahitya Academy and Kerala Sahitya Academy Awards. We have Anita Heiss. Anita Heiss is one of Australia's most prolific and well-known authors, publishing across genres including non-fiction, historical fiction, commercial fiction, and children's novel. Hello. Namaste. Namaste. In here we say namaskar. 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 In Kolkata we say namaskar. So we have Sandip Roy. Sandip Roy is an author, journalist and columnist. He has won several awards for journalism and contributed to various anthologies including Storywala, Contour of Heart, Because I Have a Voice, and The Phobic and the Erotic, The Politics of Sexualities in Contemporary India. We have Saikat Majumder. Saikat Majumder is a novelist and critic. He is also a professor of English and creative writing at Ashoka University. He is the author of 5 books, most recently the novel The Scent of God, 2019. We have Devasis. Devasis is a writer, journalist, and communication specialist. He has written extensively for The Statesman, The Telegraph, and others. His latest book, Without Prejudice, deals with human trafficking. And we have Antara Dev Sen. Antara Dev Sen is a founder, editor of the little magazine, The Independent Journal of Ideas and Letters. Sen is also a literary critic and translator, a newspaper columnist, and commentator on the media, society, politics, culture, and development. So can we have a big round of applause for all of them? So now I'll hand over the stage to you, and we have a timer, and your time starts now.
Namaskar. শুনতে পাচ্ছেন? Okay. Hi. We are here to talk today about. There's a countdown. I can't believe it. It says 49 minutes, 49 seconds. Okay. We are to talk about frenemies. Our topic is frenemies. How political can literature be? And we were, as we sat there in that little tent, we were trying to figure out what exactly it means. In the first place, frenemies, as far as we know, means people who have fundamental differences, but yet are friends. Now, does that apply to literature and politics? Do literature and politics have fundamental differences? Or does one nourish the other? Before we actually get into how political literature can be, let's just have a quick round of how each of us looks at this topic. Anita, you want to start?
Am I on? Am I turned on? Yes? Yuridu Marang, Yundu Yanada Heiss, Bala Duaradri Gealang, Aramajibu, Brangli-bu, Mirgandi, Bala Williams, Yindamaradu, Kolkata Gu, AKLF Gu, Main Gu. It's important where I come from to acknowledge country and to place myself. So I'm a Wiradjuri woman from central New South Wales. Thank you. And I pay, Yindamara is a Wiradjuri phrase to pay respect. So I pay my respects to be here. That back home could well be a political statement. I'm the author of, I think, 16 or 17 books, children's novels, historical novels, adult novels. And for my belief is that as an author, as a Wiradjuri woman from Australia, that I have a purpose as a writer, that most Aboriginal writers, I would say, and there's 7,000 of us in Australia indexed into Auslit, would see the creative arts as our political platform. We live in a country where we have very little representation in government. We do not have designated seats in Parliament like our brothers in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And theatre, novels, visual arts, dance and performance have become a space where we talk about social justice and human rights, and what the policies of protection and assimilation and the legislation that has impacted us since colonisation. Because like many colonised nations around the world, most of the history books about Australia have been written by the colonisers. And colonised peoples remember and record history very differently. So whether we are writing historical fiction or we are writing theatre, the creative arts and creativity is heavily influenced by politics.
Yeah. I come from Kerala, a state very similar to Bengal in many things. So to me, the question of being a writer today, when I began writing, I never thought of politics, because that was a time, I'm talking about the 60s, when it wasn't very necessary to be consciously political. But the last 30, 40 years, especially after the emergency, which at least some of you sitting here might remember, but most people have forgotten the emergency, unfortunately. The clamp down on human rights and constitutional rights that Mrs. Indira Gandhi imposed on India. So ever since that happened, I realized that as an Indian, my citizenship, my human situation, my freedom is always an endangered species. That if you are not political, you cannot write or open your mouth or think clearly in India. Because the whole establishment, whether it is in Delhi, whether it is in Kerala or in Chennai or wherever, it is feudal, it is fascist. It comes naturally to Indians to be, I'm very sorry to say, to be racist and fascist. I should say that. Racist in the sense of being casteist. Casteism is a form of racism. So it comes naturally to us, and we are a good people, but I can't think that we are saints, or that this nation is safe in the hands in which it is now running. So I have got beaten up by the Marxists in Kerala. The right wing threatens me with all kinds of stuff all the time, BJP and company. So for remaining independent of political parties, you pay a price. But I think as a writer and as a citizen, I need to look at these people dispassionately and question them. But that doesn't mean, last sentence of this is that I am not always writing about politics. I am a fiction writer. So my imagination is working somewhere else. But when it comes to real life, I am very political, and this politics remains at the back of my mind when I write a story or a novel.
When I first saw this thing that said Frenemies, and I was telling you I wasn't sure what the Frenemies part of it meant, but when you said, friends and with whom you may be politically very different, friends and enemies, I'm like, wow, that pretty much describes my entire school WhatsApp group.
Mine too.
So, you somehow subsist, the way to survive that is by a mute button. Unfortunately, in the rest of life, you don't really have a mute button, so you have to go along. But in terms of writing and being political, yeah, I agree entirely with what Paul is saying. It's something that you may not be conscious of it, in that the work you are doing is specifically political, but you also have no control about how somebody like you is reading that work. And I'll use my own work as an example. My novel, Don't Let Him Know, was about family secrets. strictly speaking, there's nothing political in it. There are no political parties. There's no mention of communists or BJP or Congress or anything. It's a book about family secrets, all kinds of different secrets that families hide. And one of those secrets is a man who is married but has had, is possibly gay. So the secret there is sexuality. Again, I didn't think of it as political. But in 2013, when the case for Section 377 went to the Supreme Court, a judge in the Supreme Court said 377 was perfectly fine and reinstated that law by saying, well, gays are just a minuscule minority in this country. As if you were a minuscule minority, your rights didn't count. You shouldn't have any rights. And that instantly was like a slap in the face, and it's political there, where you suddenly realize, as a person, you don't have the luxury to sit and say, oh, I am not political, because suddenly my book that I've written and the man who is hiding his sexuality all becomes part of a larger political system which is suppressing this person's identity and forcing him in certain ways, bringing the shame, the stigma he feels is as much political as it is social. And so after that, I actually became much more conscious about it. And so now, before as a writer, if someone said like, oh, do you want to write a personal story about your coming out or something, I would balk, because you don't want to be known as, oh, you're the gay writer or you're the immigrant writer or whichever box people want to put you into. But sometimes you feel that you need to make that statement because it is necessary to show people like that judge on the Supreme Court that that there is more than a minuscule minority out there.
We will come back to this. Visibility is extremely important, which is why we have the gay pride movement, the Dalit movement, and all of that, which is about visibility, like you said. Yeah.
Thank you. It's always great to be back to AKLF. A special thanks to Anjum and Maina for having me back again this year. So I moved to India after many years in the US, and one thing people would often tell me is that you speak with an accent. And I'd say, oh, really, I speak with an accent and you don't. So speaking without an accent is a bit like breathing without one's lungs. So it's like speaking with. I think, being political is exactly like that. I mean, if you're a human being, you are political. Of course, we know the saying, man is a social animal, and that implies that man is not isolated. There's always in relationship to the other human beings. Man, of course, being taken as the kind of, that problematic word, man or. But then man is also a political animal. Man or woman or human is a political animal, and that implies politics in the sense, what I believe is the French philosopher Michel Foucault understood it. Politics is wherever there's power. Whenever there's a relationship between two subjects and there's power, and there's always power. There's always power between every relationship. There's always politics. So as a writer, I'm actually really drawn towards this larger sense of the political, and which I think the personal as political was a motto made famous by the French feminists in the second wave feminism, that the political is always impersonal. And also as a reader, I've found that I've been drawn most to politics, not necessarily in the parliament or in the courtrooms, but in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the neighborhood. So 2 of my novels have been read politically. My second novel, The Firebird, set in the world of theatre in Calcutta, and how a certain kind of decadent theatre associated with prostitutes was dying out, and a certain kind of left-oriented theatre was coming into being, and how a boy was processing his relationship with his mother, who's a theatre actress. And obviously, this was set in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was read politically. But the thing is that in many ways, I do believe that art should have the right not to take a political position. What I really admire is when art plays with politics. Art plays with very dangerous political positions, and then opens those questions up. I was probably most thrown into politics, when my recent book, The Scent of God, came out. It's a story of love between two teenage boys set in a Hindu monastic order. And it so happened, I mean, it's a story that was long in the making, but it so happened that Article 377 was abolished last year, and it was almost inevitable that this book would get sucked into the vortex of debate about sexuality. And, and again, this is where all kinds of tricky issues, I mean, Sandip and I had many conversations about this because, and what is the space of activism? What is the space of art? I think these are really, really important spaces to have, and yet their relationship with art is very hard to predict. It's idiosyncratic. It's not formulaic. And that's why I think the word frenemies actually captures it really well. I mean, I like the image of the sort of school WhatsApp group. I think having made this decision of not to use a smartphone, I think the best thing is that I don't have WhatsApp, because the things that happen on WhatsApp are just, and yet we can't live it. I think we and WhatsApp are itself a kind of a frenemy. So there's the beginning of a long conversation there.
Devasis.
Namaskar. I belong to Calcutta. I am from Calcutta. I'm a Bengali, so I think it's better that I speak in salutation in Bangla. What Saikat was saying, and I agree with him, 2,300 years ago, Zoon Politikon, Aristotle said in his book, Politics, that human beings are political animal. We reside in society, and we are different than other animals. We are animals. Let's not make two bones about it. Only because we can think, only because we can reason, only because we can argue. Now, if we can reason and we can argue and we can make our own positions established, then obviously the expression that we will make, that if we are writing, they will be political. There's politics everywhere, whether in the kitchen, whether in the bedroom, whether in the office, whether in AKLF, whether in Nobanno. Okay? I would recite a poem. This poem is in Bengali. It was written for the children. It was written about 70 years ago. It was written by a Bengali poet called Annoda Shankar Roy. He was an ICS. He resigned from government service, and he wrote this poem. Teler shishi bhanglo bole khukur pore rak karo. Teler shishi bhanglo bole khukur pore rak karo. Tomra jesho buro khoka bharot bhenge bhag karo tar belay. Now let me translate it. 70 years ago he said that you are scolding the girl child because she has broken a bottle of oil. But you old foggies, you have divided the country. Now think of it. The poem after 70 years, it's being resonated today in the social media. So the situation changes. The social chronology changes, and the people do come in life. So that's why literature has to be political. There is nothing called apolitical in my mind. You have to take a stand. When you say I'm black, then there is, in comparison, there is somebody white. If you say I'm left, then there is somebody on your right. So to that extent, I think literature has to be political. Okay? I wrote a book. I was a journalist. Then I went to public relations. I sold brands because of my living. I didn't like it. Anyway, so I wrote a book which is all human trafficking. So when we come, we will talk about it. Now, human trafficking is a political problem. Like migration, it's a political problem. Like division, boundary, globalization, sexuality. Everything is a political problem. So we need to look at it as writers, as creative persons. We need to debate it. People will threaten us. We need to stand. If we crumble, then we are not writers. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the basic initial round of what we mean by this. And two things emerge from this. One is some people like Devasis, some writers like Devasis, believe that art needs to take a stand, and others like Saikat. And this also, I think, Paul was also saying that, but in a more nuanced fashion, that if you are, art needs to stand apart, and you could use art for political purposes, but it needs the freedom to be completely free of all your isms and all your ideologies and just be. So, but of course there is this question of writing itself being a political statement. For many of us, if you're a woman, writing is a political statement, because for a woman, the personal is political. Everything you do is read as your personal thing. If you write about a prostitute, you are a prostitute. If you write about the coming of age, if you write a coming of age novel between two girls, then you are a gay person. You know, so everything a woman does is immediately read as her life story. So there is, so I'm very, very interested to know more about Anita and how, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing you the way we say Anita. How do you actually in Australia pronounce Anita? Anita, okay, good. So now I was saying Anita like we do. Yeah, the thought. Yeah. So being an Aboriginal writer is again a statement. You cannot but be political, right? It is a political statement by writing, and you. So whatever you write, whether or not what do you think of the option of having art as a free, as a free space?
From my perspective, in the world that I exist in Australia, but also published internationally, is it would be an extreme privilege for me to sit down and write something that didn't have a particular political point to make or a purpose in terms of writing. All my books are about writing Aboriginal people, largely women and children, particularly Wiradjuri people, into the Australian literary landscape, putting us on the Australian literary radar and the international literary radar in a space where we haven't belonged before. I was the first, nobody wants to pioneer a genre because then you've got to follow it up with something. But I was the first First Nations writer to write a commercial women's novel, chick lit, like Bridget Jones meets Carrie Bradshaw in Sydney. And it did, got option for TV straight away. Within 6 weeks they published on it another book because Australian readers hadn't been challenged in the genre of reading about relationships, which most of us want companionship. Regardless of our gender preferences, we want companionship. Lots of women like to shop and have sex and so forth. I can write a book about astral travelling and be in France and so forth, but also weave into that Indigenous intellectual property rights. And one of my characters wants to be the Minister of Domsaria, which is the Department of Media, Sports, Refugees and Indigenous Affairs. That's a ministry I made up. But quite often our portfolios are tagged on to another portfolio. So I was making a political point there in a novel that was regarded as chick lit or romance. And for me, I wanted to see women like me on the page. I was reading fantastic Australian literature, but I never saw educated, urban, passionate, sassy Aboriginal women in Australian literature. And whether or not that was a political statement, I did weave in politics into that. And I think we made the comment, you made the comment about we can't control how people read our work. And that's true. So for the budding writers in the room, you might write something that's completely non-political, but you have no control about the way a reader responds to that. But all my work has a purpose. And that is every single novel, whether it's for children or not. We have a national curriculum in Australia which requires schools throughout the country to embed, as part of that curriculum, Indigenous perspectives in the classroom. Because when I went to school, we learnt that the boats sailed in and there was no warfare, which is not true. And so I want to write books so that there is diversity in the classroom, not just so that Aboriginal children can see themselves on the page, but so that non-Indigenous Anglo kids can also see diversity on the page. And we have a saying, I don't know whether I said this at the beginning, that in Australia, if you're born Aboriginal, you're born political, by choice or by not by choice. But I didn't come here to make political statements. This is the panel. But interesting, frenemies. We struggled with the term in the green room, and now it's kind of making sense. And I have a novel called Titters, And tidders is a generic Aboriginal term we use in Australia, and it means sisters or your BFF. And there are 5 women, and 3 of them are Wiradjuri women, and 2 of them are non-Wiradjuri, non-Indigenous women, and it's about how they navigate life as the best of friends, but when they have different worldviews, whether it's the politics of identity or the politics of abortion. But how do we as human beings, with our frenemies, how do we navigate that and respect each other's opinions? Yeah.
Very interesting. Because navigating friendships can be done, but respecting each other's differences isn't always easy. On my WhatsApp group, school WhatsApp group, for example, I have no interest in respecting most of their views on politics and culture and religion. So, that's also a political decision that you take, that I will not respect. I will not be politically correct. It's just there's a basic system of values, and this attacks that. So you need to, after a point, you need to move away from being politically correct to being correct in a more humanist way, I believe. Paul, most of your work has been extremely political in every sense of the term. And you have, of course, I really want to, you have talked about religion, you've talked about politics, about social differences, all kinds of things. Right now, you have written a book which just sort of takes it totally to a different level. The History of Compassion. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Antara, that book, the one you're talking about, I wrote it in English because I've been reading English, studying English, and enjoying English for so many years, for more than half a century. So I, like many Indians, we feel it's our own language, so I have written a novel in English. And there I have taken much more freedom than I could take in Malayalam because one reason is that would sound very silly, but you see, Malayalam is a very conservative, male-dominant language with too many taboos about sex. So if you even want to cursorily discuss sex, there is a problem. You don't even have words with which you can present sex without appearing to be obscene. You see, it's a very complicated problem for a writer. I don't want to be a porn writer in order to discuss sex, you see. I would rather not write. So, but then I did manage. I have fairly successfully managed bridge this gap in Malayalam, and people, I'm not taken, people don't look at me respectfully to that extent. I don't care. But the thing is that this new English novel, the one I wrote it in English, it discusses sex a lot, death a lot, religion, God, etc., which all have been.
God is a woman, by the way. Here, he's changing everything. It's extremely interesting because all the concepts have been changed, and even the concept of sex. He's talking about. He says that he wanted to write about sex without seeming to be obscene, and English does give you that freedom. But even the sex, you say that it's the wife of the spider says sex is fiction.
Sex is a fiction.
Sex is fiction. So Spider gets very worried. Spider is this guy you'll know when you.
No, when she says sex is fiction, my protagonist's wife, who is a freelance philosopher, so when she says sex is a fiction, he gets very worried. He says, "What have I been doing all these years? Then was it all fiction?" And then he says, "I hope it was at least adult fiction." See so that's my character. He's a writer of a popular novel. But Antara, the thing is that this is how one, perhaps I was fulfilling a long felt need to express myself completely without any taboos pressing on me, etc., etc. Because if you write good, clean novels in Malayalam or short stories in Malayalam, you can become a very rich man because it goes into the textbook market. And then your books are sold in lakhs of copies. So I failed in that test. So that is one thing. So the other way about politics, Sandra, the only thing is I differentiate. My political activity in my language is basically writing articles and speaking in public about politics. So, because you cannot have a political theme every time you want to write a story or a novel, but politics comes into it inevitably. There is politics, especially living in Kerala, as many of you said here. There's a politics of woman being a subsidiary, what do you call a subservient citizen. It's a male-dominant society, and so for me, this male domination has been imprinted into my brain for so long. Every time I put pen on paper, I have to remember that don't think about women as second-class citizens. Remember to treat them with equality in real life also, as you know, not only in fiction. So there is politics like this always at work. And last point, the Christian church is very powerful in Kerala. So I was born into a Christian family. I am an atheist and an unbeliever. Without any qualms, I am out of it. But again, the Christian politics, the Christian faith keeps pushing me very often into feeling guilty, etc., etc. So I have to fight that politics also. But it's a very interesting thing. I have no complaints. Kerala is still reasonably, like Bengal, can I say? Like Bengal is reasonably safe and free from powerful right-wing pressures. It is there, but we are still reasonably free.
We still have some freedom to speak in Bengal, the freedom that we don't have in some other parts of India. And it's not always easy to speak about sexuality. But the reason that you chose English, it's interesting because I think our Indian languages lack the terms to deal with it. Even in Bengali, when you talk about, things that sound perfectly normal in English, not just because we are more used to the terms because they've been around for longer in English, but also...
Can I add one point there? In Malayalam, we escape into Sanskrit when we want to say obscene things.
That's a very erudite way of doing it. You must teach me some. You must teach me some, yes. So, yes. I remember in the Little Magazine once I got a long letter in Malayalam from somebody, and I got a Malayali friend of mine to read it, and the only thing that I could understand throughout, every second sentence had it was Nagna Chitram. So, and this person was objecting to Nagna Chitram, and we had a lot of naked picture. We had a lot of art there, and art does involve nudity to a certain extent. So this Nagna Chitram was I can understand the Sanskrit part. So in Bengali too, we have this problem of, even the word Jono Kormi sounds, it does sound industrial, It's, anyway, so you have been dealing with sexuality in your writings, and how much freedom do you think you have to, I'm going to treat this as political because it is. The subject, what you talk about, choosing what you're going to talk about is a political act. Choosing what you're not going to even touch is another political act. So when you choose to talk about things that might get you into trouble, that upset the majoritarian narrative, that make people in power, you talked about power, but people in power annoyed, then you're taking a very decisive and important political step. So do you, since you have been writing about homosexuality, which is...
Well, in a certain sense, I think that's where I sort of make a little bit of a distinction between what I write as a novelist or creative fiction and then what I'm writing as a journalist or columnist, where I feel that as a novelist, I want to tell a story and let you draw the conclusion you want, read what you want into that story. As a columnist, my job is in 800 words to make some kind of proposition or an argument. I'm basically making an argument that I want to prove that this is the case and hopefully persuade you to my argument. So, and whether I'm writing about immigrants or whether I'm writing about religious minority or whether I'm writing about sexual minority, as a novelist, I think I would feel terribly constrained if I suddenly felt that that person had to sort of bear the burden of representation of that community, you know. So, oh, you wrote a bad Muslim character, so that means you're feeding into the Hindutva, or oh, if you've written a bad gay person, so therefore why are you feeding into a larger majoritarian homophobia. So there, I don't want to be in that thing. My only point as a novelist is the character believable? Is the person is that person, even if that person is, like, for example, in my book, there is a man who is married and happens to be gay, right? Now, as a columnist, I can stand back and say, I think we should be at a point in society where men who are gay are not feel like they have to get in the choice. It is very wrong of what they're doing to their wife, who it does not know, is being trapped in this relationship and it's no idea and all of that. But as a novelist, I cannot but not feel empathy for every one of the characters. So I don't want him to be the villain of my book. So that is where I think I'm always trying to play this balancing act on, how, and sometimes being a journalist actually offers you a bit of a respite because you have a little platform in which you can say, I feel this about this thing, and that is actually freeing in a certain way, being able to say that, because you don't want to put the burden of your particular beliefs on all your characters, especially when those characters are, maybe they're not that many, whatever, gay characters or Dalit characters or whatever in there, but it is scary in these times that you feel scared about writing about certain people because because all this question of who are you to write about this person, all of these prickly questions start coming up, and that makes it, it becomes a bit of a political minefield because there are a lot, and this is not just like, even if suppose I'm a gay person, I can write and someone can come and say, but oh no, your gay characters are too Hindu normative middle class thing, where is the sari wearing bearded person in your work, and you're never going to please everybody.
No, you can't. Literature doesn't want to please everybody also, I believe. Literature wants to reach out. I mean, my rudimentary belief as a reader would be that literature would just want to reach out to somebody and try to get you to think the way they want you to think. And therefore...
I just want, like, recently with all the citizenship thing that was happening, it struck me that there was somebody who spoke up against it. I can't remember. It was a student activist who happened to be gender non-conforming, right? So it was this person who had a beard, wore a sari, and was immediately roundly attacked, not on the basis of what they were saying or the points they were making, but look at what kind of freakish people are against, these other kinds of anti-nationals and citizens.
While I completely agree with that, that is also why I disagree with what you said a little while ago, when you said that you will have to make your characters believable, and therefore not every Muslim in your character, I mean, a Muslim could be a bad guy, or a Dalit could be a villain. I think at one point, the author also needs to take a call on that, because there have been bad Muslim characters for too long. There have been ridiculous Dalit villains for too long. There have been dumb blonde women for too long. I think right now, if you're making a character, as Paul said, he needs to keep reminding himself, because we all live in this society which has ingrained in us various patriarchal
as you
and other things.
saw what happened with Chappak, the huge controversy where it was a fake controversy where they said, oh, the religion of the person who threw the acid has been changed, and that became...
That was a lie.
That was
yeah,
a lie.
That was a lie. But that's the thing. You need to be very... I would say that I think, Paul, would you want to respond? I'm very interested in knowing what you think about that.
What you call the typicalization of characters that a Muslim, but today you have to consciously, it's a pity that you have to consciously make a Muslim a good character. As a writer, I would find it difficult, but then for so many years, every Hindi film villain had a Muslim name. And then it shifted to a Goan name, if you have noticed. It will be Tony Fernandez or, something like that would be the villain. Otherwise, it would be Ali or something like that.
Sometimes it's an Ajit. Sometimes it's an Ajit also. But all his real henchmen are Tonys and
Tonys, yeah. And they never took a Malayali Christian name till now. George Joseph or Thomas Joseph or something. He has never been a villain. I don't know why. But because Mumbai film industry knows more Goan Christians than Kerala Christians, Malayali Christians. That's why. But it is a problem. It is a problem. And I would like to, if I would like to present a Muslim as a villain, I would like to do it without feeling guilty. But I think the time has passed. I don't think we can ever do that for a long time. Like in the US today it has changed. There are black villains coming back now. Otherwise, for about 30, 40 years, it was mandatory that you should have a black man as a good character and never as a villain. But I think we are now entering a stage where I think we'll have to treat Muslim, even a Muslim villain with a real villain with some softness. I have a feeling.
In fact, if I can butt in, I'm sorry,
Yes,
with your permission.
absolutely.
See, this is a question of profiling. How do you profiling? The question that's coming today is of profiling. First of all, even if we bring in our political beliefs, first of all, it has to be a literature. Now, until or unless it's a literature, then no point bringing politics. Then it becomes a manifesto. So how do we define literature, bringing in politics, but not becoming manifesto? Now, there's the problem, as I think all of us as writers face, is that do we getting into profiling? Are we getting into racial profiling or religious profiling or social profiling? I will talk about, I wrote about human trafficking, community-sanctioned trafficking. Now, I'm going to talk about the personal issue because the problem that I failed is that most of the time when I looked at it as a journalist, it was only a police story. Police was showing so much has been raided, so much girl has been rescued from prostitution, so much girls has been rescued from the dance bars and everything. But where is the story of the girl? I mean, why she is a dance bar dancer? What compelled her to become a dance bar dancer? Now, when you start tracing it back, you see that there is a community which is socially sanctioning these girls to come into this profession. Now, since the girl is at the forefront of it, since the society, since the administration, the police is targeting them and telling them, you are bad, you are bad, you are bad, in our memory we say, oh, they are bad, they are bad, they are bad. There's an African proverb, as long as the hunters write the history, the lion would never be the hero. So we have to look at the underdogs. If we are writers, those who are politically inclined and writing on issue, whether it is LGBTQ, whether we're talking about social, society setup, familial setup, whether we are talking about, within the family, the children's rights. What about the good touch and the bad touch? So I think as a conscious writer, we need to take this and write in a beautiful way. It has to be a story. If the story is, why is Sharat Chandra's Devdas, it was written in 1903. Even today, 7 or 8 versions of the film has been made. Even today, people, that Jamindari system is no longer existent, but the story is relevant. The story of the other woman. So I think that's the way we should look at it, and I agree that as writers, we should get out of the profiling and we should be very consciously writing about it, and we should not write about, in a way that it becomes a manifesto. It has to be a literature first.
This is where, while I think most of us would agree with this is where the question of authenticity comes in. Because you writing about a woman dance bar, a dance bar woman, or a woman who has been trafficked, while it might end up being the history written by the hunter pretending to be the lion. You know, I mean, do you know what I mean? It's so that there is that question of authenticity, which Anita here was talking about, how Aboriginal writing is mostly, almost always by Aborigines themselves.
I'll do this really quickly because I'm conscious of you. There would be very few publishers in Australia today who would publish a novel by a non-Indigenous person with key Aboriginal characters in it. And if they did, they would have questioned that author about their methodology, even for a novel, for the research. Absolutely, because we have a history of being misrepresented in every piece of writing. From non-Indigenous people have penned hideous things, stories about us. So it's about actually our right to assert and self-representation in literature, in journalism, in all forms of writing and so forth. And I would say to the audience, I say to all audiences and my students, if I want to learn about farming, I'll buy a book by a farmer, not by a stockbroker, because as brilliant as we might think we are as writers, we write through a lens and we read through a lens.
Yeah.
And we take to the page, even though we might think we're writing pure fiction, we take to the page our politics and our worldviews and how we see people, even though we're trying to censor things.
Even if we try to cleanse,
And I think I can say hand on heart that Aboriginal people in Australia are tired of being written about as the other, and that our literature is a political statement, that this is who we are. We have not gone away. Policies of assimilation and protection did not mean that we would die out. And these are our stories in our voices. And there is a book here called Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia. It's got 52 stories in there, and it's been hugely successful. And I believe that's because audiences in Australia are desperate to hear authentic stories from the heart, from our heart, which will speak to other people's hearts.
Right. Authenticity, of course, is problematic again, because there are certain communities who might not. I mean, how do we talk about the illiterate majority, even now, today? The illiterate masses, by virtue of being illiterate, can't write. So does it mean that we won't have illiterate characters in our novels at all? Is every illiterate character in every fictional, in every piece of fiction completely inauthentic because the writer is literate? So authenticity itself is a problematic topic, but it's there. It's one of the things that one needs to be aware of. Saikat, what?
And it's, the thing is, it's not just a question of identity, it's also a problem of mode of thought. I think the example that comes to my mind was the historians of what is known as the subaltern school. When they talk about, Indian history, they are written either by British imperialists or they are written by the nationalists. Now, when you talk about, say, the tribal revolution, how do you give them voice? And this is where I think the historian Deepesh Chakraborty puts it very well, that you run into a real problem, because history as a discipline has a certain rational structure. Now, when a tribal says, "Oh, I didn't fight the war, my God did. The Thakur fought the war." Now, it's impossible for a historian to say that, "No, God fought the war." The historian immediately has to say that the tribal believes God fought the war. And the argument is that the moment you say the tribal believes, you're moving away from the authentic voice of the tribal and you're creating an anthropology. So this is exactly the problem of even having, say, characters who don't read and write. Literature is by definition a very bourgeois medium. Literature became literature through the Enlightenment, through emergence of print. It was very different before. So how do you have that? And I think the good news is, though, we all have otherness in us. We are we think we are something, but we are also that what is not. So when I write a novel about the queer experience, and I have never really written anything like Sandip on the in a public space claiming that activist space, I think sexuality is a very fluid thing. We cannot, whether or not we identify as something, there's always spaces which remain unclaimed. So there is always that murky zone. But the point is, it's not just about who we are, but who we are goes with a certain kind of thought and certain institutions of writing, whether it's literature or history or politics, are rooted in certain traditions. A lot of these traditions go back to the modernity that we inherited from the Enlightenment, which has a certain scientific and rational color. Anything that goes beyond, which is why writing about religion is such a challenge. It's so difficult. And yet so many minority communities, so many aboriginal communities, the religious experience is so important. Now how, when knowledge is so bourgeois, you integrate that? How do you make your sentences stand up to it? This was a challenge for the French feminists. It's not just about writing about the female experience. How do you capture the syntax? How do you capture the sentence? And this was Helen Sixou's answer, broken syntax, broken. And even that position has been criticized, that just because you break syntax, you get into a kind of essentialist position. Oh, that's how women think. Joyce's Molly Bloom, greatest stereotype of all, that, oh, this is how women think. And we all know Joyce took that from his half-literate wife, Nora Barnacle, who was just, and then it becomes so it's also very problematic. But it's not just, we have to remember that we're limited by what we are representing. And the whole conversation about English and Malayalam and Bengali has been very, very interesting, that how certain languages get inhibited, how their diction gets shaped in a certain way. And I think as writers, the best moments are when we struggle against these limitations. And I think the most triumphal moments of literature is not when we succeed, but when we fail. Because glorious failure is what art is about.
Point. In terms of this debate on authenticity, I think we always are afraid that it's a sort of cascade of ever narrowing boxes that will eventually force you to only write in the strict parameters of the experience that you're in. But actually, it's a much more evolving thing. So, for example, when I first lived in the United States in the 90s, and I would turn on television and watch the cartoon show The Simpsons, I actually enjoyed seeing the guy who played Apu, the shopkeeper in there, with his terrible Indian accent and his head waggle. And to me, it was like, oh, wow, somebody named Hank Azaria, who is not South Asian, did this voice. And so, but now I can see, 20 years later, why Indian-American comedians like Hari Kondanapolu had so much problem with Apu, where he say, the problem is not that someone did it then. The problem is it didn't change over those 20 years. When someone was doing it then, there were no other voices around. This was the only thing. And for someone like me, it was the closest thing you could see to a brown face on national American television. Now you come to the situation where years later, I'm watching ER, a medical drama set in Chicago, and my friends are saying, how is there a medical drama happening in Chicago in public hospital and there's not a single Indian doctor on the show? This is just not possible. And so then you realize that in the end, the art has to reflect the country and the changing country, and the fact that now that someone like a Hari is able to be a comedian, Indian American, and stand up, doesn't negate what Apu did 20 years ago. It just means that maybe it's time to change.
Maybe it also sort of paved the way for the Haris and others to find an audience. It probably made the American ear more receptive to the Indian accent. One thing I find very interesting in the in the History of Compassion, which is Paul Zacharia's fantastic novel, first debut novel in English, is the way that you bring in politics, as you mostly do, in a very surreptitious way. It's you. For example, if you can't deal with something, then you change the definition of whatever it is. Compassion, the word compassion, for example, is difficult since you can't fit in the word compassion to whatever else you are seeing. So the answer to that is just change the definition of compassion, then everything will fit in happily into it. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
No, actually, that particular thing I don't. Yes, the name itself that I gave the novel, it's called A Secret History of Compassion. So this is actually a popular writer who has a popular writer of thrillers and romances is asked to write an essay on compassion. For the first time in his life, he is asked to write an essay by the Communist Party for a souvenir for retired comrades who need an old people's home to collect funds. So he struggles with the whole idea of how to define compassion to begin with, and he can't get into the subject. Then a hangman who is able to change shape, he is a flyer.
Interestingly, a hangman named Jesus.
Jesus Lambodara Pillai is his full name. So he comes in, he changes shape, he's a warrior, which he says he's a meditative warrior, because he says, when I am warring, I am meditating. So this is, other times he is a hangman. So between them, they try to sort out the problem of compassion. And as she said, the politics comes in where compassion is something that everybody wants to use to their own advantage. In fact, the hangman says there is a compassion industry at work. So if I write this essay on compassion, it might affect the industry and they might send somebody to kill us. So this is the way I was trying to do it. But if you happen to read the novel, you will know what it is.
Okay, thank you. So now I think we have about 6 minutes for questions. So please. Yeah, one hand. Please, will you, can somebody give, is there a mic there? Can you just, yeah, the mic is coming to you. Till then, if you can. And others, can you please keep your questions in mind?
Hello, thank you for such an amazing session. So my question was that you were discussing about the authenticity that the literature can be, and as sir said that it cannot be a manifesto, it has to be literature at the end of the day. So while portraying reality in the end of the day is very nitty-gritty and is very vulgar. So how do you stop yourself from saying the vulgar things and in the same time not romanticizing them?
Excellent. What is the next question? Let's take 3 questions and then move on. Next question, please. Okay, let's answer this while the next question comes up.
Okay. Hi. See, that's where the question comes in. Are you a Bengali? Okay. You know there is a language called Bottola Sahitya, right? So how do you difference, which is basically pornographic material, and how do you make it a literature? So that's the understanding of the writer. That's how possibly a writer will transcend. If you remember, when I was young, there were 2 books that came out in Bengal. One was called Projapati, and another was called Bibor, one by Buddhadev Bosu, and another by Somoresh Bosu. When they wrote about it, they wrote about incest, basically. Not that incest doesn't exist in our society, it does. They wrote about it. There was humongous amount of debate. But at the end of the day, those stood the test of time because those who wrote it, they wrote it in a manner that's called literature. So that's the capacity. If as a writer, I can't make that distinction,
Anybody else?
you will throw me away. you will throw me away. So
it's
authenticity, yes. At the same time, that's what I'm saying. That's where the literature has to be. That has to be
Absolutely.
a self-censor.
It has to, at a uttaran darkar.
Yes, there has to be a self-censor. Where do I stop?
Okay, we have to stop now because we need the next question. We only have 3 minutes. If there's another question, otherwise we can go on with this one question. No other question. We have explained everything so lucidly. Everybody understands. There's no doubt.
They don't dare ask the question because of the authenticity.
Yes. Fear of authenticity is holding you back from asking questions.
Challenge us, come on.
Okay, let's ask each other questions. Do we have any questions for the audience? Or how?
No, I was going to ask you, Paul. So you wrote it in English. You wrote this book in English, but would you be okay with someone translating it into Malayalam?
Frankly, I am quite scared. If I would be known as a Sahitya Academy award-winning porn writer. That is what I think most probably I would. I don't want to be that.
Which is a pretty good label to have, I think. You know, that's a good. That sounds like a good.
Everyone will remember.
Will run the Sahitya Academy.
Yeah.
I think the issue is not about the what you write about, but what you do with it. I think, you know, art is a lot like justice. It's blind. The subject doesn't matter at all. It's the treatment of the subject which really matters. I always say that, you know, it's not like a novel about the Fourth World War is more important than a poem about two women gossiping in the kitchen. It's not like that. It's the same thing. I mean, I think Devasis has given two really good examples. My favorite example from Western literature tends to be the book Lolita, which is, you know, it's not just about the erotic, but think of the moral position. And the American critic Lionel Twining has a wonderful essay on Lolita. He says that romance must be always transgressive. And he goes back to saying that in the 19th century, marriages in European aristocracy were always based on property, alliance, royal relationship. So the space for romance was always outside marriage, and that is adultery. Now in the 20th century, adultery, it's bad, that's boring, it's not interesting anymore, it's common. Now we need to look for a new transgressive space for romance. And for him, it is the relationship between a 53-year-old man and a 13-year-old girl. And he has this incredibly daring essay where he says that Lolita is actually about romance. So the point is, you know, what position you take. And this is the risky position a work of art can take. And I think, like Sandip was saying earlier, there are certain positions you don't, there are certain positions you feel compelled to, you feel compelled to advocate as a citizen, as somebody who writes in a newspaper. But in the space of art, there are all kinds of dangerous possibilities lurking. And that is the frame between art and life. So.
Yeah, and now we have to stop because our time has run out. Quick comment? One quick comment, 20 seconds.
No, replying to her in 20 seconds, it's basically it's a matter of, as I think many of us said here, it's a matter of transcending. You have to, the stuff may be dirty, but you have to find the right word, the right way of presenting it, the right logic, and make it beautiful, you know, in some way, so that the person who reads it doesn't really feel dirty. That is, I think that's what it is.
So there you have it. It's we are exactly on time, 00. So whether or not we've got the answers, we don't know, but we've had some discussion on politics and literature and sexuality. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
A round of applause for our respected delegates, please. It has been an exuberant session and we have enjoyed much. I would also like to thank all the lovely audience present here. Thank you for sticking around. And thanking the delegates once again, we had Paul Zacharia, Anita Heiss, Sandip Roy, Saikat Majumder, Devasis, Antara Dev Sen. The book signing lounge is right there to my right. If any of you are interested, just stick around. It's right there. And all the food places are right there to my left. If you want to munch on something this evening, go ahead, have fun and enjoy. Thank you so much.